Well, it's crack, everybody. My name is Pádraig O'Hora, and I recently sat down with Rose Conway-Walsh of Sinn Féin to discuss all things political in the lead up to the election on the 29th. I think a lot of us are looking for good information, unclear and maybe undecided yet. So take a listen, see what you think, and hopefully you enjoy. Today I'm joined by no other than Rose Conway-Walsh. Thank you for joining me first and foremost. Delighted to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Pádraig.
Yeah, and looking forward to, we have crossed paths a number of times over the last number of years. You've managed to help me out a number of times with different bits and pieces. So I think it's really important in the lead up to the election that people get the right information, especially the younger cohort. I remember being 18 and my uncle asking me was I going to vote, and I said I wasn't too bothered, and he said, as many will say, people died for that vote. It's important. So, and it is incredibly important. So I think it's a good opportunity to, I suppose, pass out some information to the younger voters in particular about what you do, what you're trying to do, and why you do what you do. So
sure, and I think as you say there, you're right. There'll be a lot of young people who will be voting for the first time, and I think that's a really precious thing to have. I know my own nephew has just turned 18. He's from Ballycroy, and he's really excited about voting for the first time and what a difference that will make as well. And often young people say to me, well, you know, what difference will it make or whatever. But it is crucial that young people do, because often governments look at young people and say, well, sure, they won't bother to vote anyway. So then you find that policies from governments are skewed away from young people, if you like. So the way for young people to have their voice heard is to vote. Now, I believe that the voting age should be 16 for a number of reasons, but not least to make it easier for people to vote. So while they're in the school circle or in the secondary school, that people get registered. Also, I believe that people should be automatically registered. It can be quite difficult for people to just even have the time and the thinking space to just get registered to vote. So we need to make it easier for people to vote. We need 16-year-olds to be able to vote and to get into the practice before they leave secondary school. But it's really important that everybody who has a vote uses that, because as you rightly say, people died. And I often think of young women as well, in terms of it was a long time before women got the vote.
yeah,
It's only a short time ago. Then you had situations where people could only vote if they had property. But now, thanks be to God, we have that, you know, everybody can vote regardless of what their circumstances are. So I would encourage people to come out and have their voice heard, because otherwise they're lending their voice to somebody else. And I suppose in this election, what we're asking people to do is really to think of, do you want more of the same, or do you want things to change? And often people feel powerless in what difference will it make? But really the power, and this is the good thing about the 29th of November, because the power collapses and it's handed back to the people. And you have your power in your pen as a young person to go out and decide, this is what I'm going to do, and this is why I'm going to do it, Pádraig.
yeah.
You know, so it's just to get people thinking.
I agree, and I think what happens is a lot of people think, I'm just one person, it's just one vote.
Yes.
And I suppose if you collectively take that mindset, now we're talking hundreds, thousands, and it changes the balances altogether. I like the idea of the 16. I didn't actually think of it before, but certainly I think I was in St Nordics last week for an event for Mayo Mental Health Association. The young people at 16, 17, 18 now are, to put it lightly, far further along the lines, in my opinion, in a lot of areas. Their understanding and comprehension of the world is much further than it was for me, anyway, at 17, 18. And I think, they are politically activated, and it is a good opportunity to get them in. Now, again, you mentioned more of the same, and we've heard a good bit about that, I suppose. I would like to talk about parties, certainly, at some stage, but 18 to 24-year-olds, in my opinion, I think are very impartial. I personally am. I'm not tied to any party. I'm tied to people that do what they say, have integrity, and make change. And as I said, in my personal experience with you have done that, and that has nothing to do with party. It's simply to do with person. You're not a Ballina woman either, but nonetheless, you still helped out when called upon. So, for those that are listening or watching, why Rose Conway-Walsh? Let's take parties out of the situation. Let's just look at you as a person, as a politician. why should somebody come out and vote for Rose Conway-Walsh?
Well, I think it's a bit to look at my background. I mean, I grew up in Ballycroy from one of a family of 9. And the things that are really important to me is having a level playing field for people. And this is what it's done to me all the time. Even before ever I came into politics, it was about creating that. So when I just know how important, say, education was and how important it was to have that chance to be as good as you can be. I don't mean good in the sense of good, but to be able to fulfill your potential. And I truly believe that in a republic, everybody should have the right to fulfill their potential. So for me, growing up, and I believe in adult learning very much, and I have gone back to college as well.
You and me both.
Myself. So I did. I have an honours degree in public management and a master's in local government and a master's in economic policy as well. I only graduated for my last master's in April, and I was laughing because my eldest son graduated the other day from Trinity as well. He's actually gone to London now, so he is 23, and we're so in the same year both of us graduated. And then my other son, Peter, he's a DJ as well. You might have heard of him, Father and Adam, but he goes to college in Trinity as well. He does computer science and linguistics. So we're kind of all part of the education system as well. And I do think it's important for young people to realise that, they're lifelong learning. You don't have to do everything in the way. One of my other things is around the way the Leaving Cert is done as well. And you what kind of a system tells you that you have to pack in all this information, and then your intelligence is measured on how much you can vomit back up in the paper? It just seems crazy. So I'm very much for the reform of Leaving Cert as well.
I think everybody sees that now.
Having a different way of learning. And also, yes, exactly.
I think everybody sees it now, especially with the additional needs really coming to the fore, the changes in regards to the young people with additional needs. We can all see that the Leaving Cert fundamentally doesn't work for most young people. Yeah, you're exactly right. And just in terms of intelligence, like emotional intelligence and social intelligence is so important. And that's not measured on a Leaving Cert paper, but you rightly say in additional needs. I mean, one of the proudest moments for me was when my own relative, who's very close to me, who's autistic, and he got his Leaving Cert applied. And, that's the certificate that's up on the wall. And everybody comes through different journeys and have different ways of learning, and we need to have systems that suits people there, that it doesn't just suit one cohort of people, but that we look at how people learn. And I do think we need to be evolving much quicker in that regard, and we need to have... So I was just up there seeing the Gael School up there now in Ballina as well, and they applied for funding for their hall and all that. And you can see there's a wonderful atmosphere within the school, but it's hard for me to understand then why those kids aren't invested in, because they deserve a play hall, they deserve to have everything else that kids in Dublin 4 and other places have. And that's a long way around kind of saying what motivates me and what drives me. It is equality of access, but in terms of young people as well as... See, not everybody's home is conducive to people participating fully in education. And I see that fully in my roles, absolutely.
Yes, and we have to make it so that it has. So before I ever got into politics again, I worked in homework clubs and developing homework clubs and that, so that people could have that equality of access. So we have to be mindful of that. I don't like this situation where you have, every time the Leaving Cert is announced and you have the people with the 600 and whatever
625s
points.
now, I believe.
I really, really don't like that, because it's about the journey that people have had to go through and the resilience that young people have had to go. I have so much admiration for young people. I see it even in my own boys, even in discussing different things with them. And you rightly say, I know when I was their age, I didn't have half of the cop on that they have. Not even that, but half of the knowledge that they have. And it's probably one of the good things about social media.
I think so. It's the information sharing at a young age. It is. I would argue it certainly has had a negative impact in regards to mental health and in a lot of other areas, but yes, there is a silver lining.
Yeah.
The information shared, the young people are growing up and they have the access to the information.
Yeah.
I'm blown away by some of the young people, even in our club, the 17, 18-year-olds that are playing with us at senior level. Their attitude towards life, their expectations, their demands on themselves, it's impressive. I certainly didn't see that fire in a lot of young people our age anyway. But I lean into the equality with you, and I've seen you, in fairness, that those have been the topics we've touched on over the last number of years, and you have helped. What changes would you like to see?
I would like to see that everybody who needs support around mental health and access to different services, that they would have that access. That is why, as well, in Mindspace Mayo, when we set up, I actually spent 5 years going up and down from Balmullah to help to bring that to Mayo in the first instance, but to design it, to do the feasibility study. We worked with a great group of people that time.
That was a really good team.
One of them I met the other day, and I shouldn't really mention names, but Jean-Anne Garvin, and she's a psychologist as well. But there was a great team of us that worked for 5 years on that. Like, things take too long as well.
They do, of course.
But it's a great satisfaction to me then to see Mindspace Mayo develop as well, and the services develop. But the truth is that we do not have enough services at the right time, in the right place, for people who are experiencing different mental health challenges. And let's face it, we all do.
100%.
We walk out there in the street. I have in my own life in different things. People have different challenges around loss, around bereavement, around just different things that happen in people's lives. The one thing I do like is that the stigma is being taken away from mental health. One time it would be seen as somehow it was a weakness. Now it is to be embraced. That people get, in the same way as you break your leg or something physically happens to you, that you access the services that you need, the mental health services. So, but along with that, you need the investment in the services there. And I'm afraid to say, but they're not always there. So in terms of CAMHS, and also that's why I admire teachers so much, because they're trying to cope with a lot of stuff in schools as well.
An unbelievable amount. They've essentially become social workers, in my opinion. My partner is a teacher, my kids are in primary school. I see the effort and attention. I see the level of education the teachers need to bring themselves to. They're not just teaching their children anymore. The demands on them are essentially to parent some children, in my opinion, and to essentially work as a social worker. Their expectations have increased significantly, and especially with mental health services. I want to touch on that because the policies are there, the strategies are there, in my opinion. I think they're there, and I think they're relatively strong. The issue is implementation. They are there. Mindspace, you mentioned, phenomenal service. We're blessed to have it in Mayo. But overall, nationally, the lack of implementation is shocking, in my opinion. When you have a young person or an adult, it doesn't matter. If you have somebody that's in a mental health crisis, and the only way of accessing service is to walk into A&E, where you have to go through triage, you have to go through all these systems, all these barriers to the actual care and attention you need, it hinders the whole service, it dysfunctions the whole service, and then we have people not getting the support. If you walk into your GP and ask for counselling at the moment, the waiting list for somebody publicly is about 18 months to 2 years. You know yourself, if I'm coming looking for counselling, I'm in crisis. I need help now or tomorrow, not in 18 months' time. So that's really where I see the biggest issues, is why are things not... We do have the strategies, we do have I think we arguably have the services in place, maybe they're underfunded, but why are they not being implemented? That's the big one.
You're 100% right. We have enough strategies to cover the whole of the country, in terms of pay per exit. We had Vision for Change. If Vision for Change was fully implemented, we wouldn't be having the same type of conversation that we're having now. Then we further on strategies from that. So everybody has the ideas. And often a lot of money is paid for these strategies to develop them and all that. So it's in the implementation of it that they're not implemented. There's a number of reasons for that. And as you say rightly, the services there, but the services, I know what it was like to work in the community and voluntary sector and community development. You're going from year to year. So you need multi-annual funding and significant funding, but multi-annual funding, so that you're able to plan and to strategize and all that. If you're going from year to year, you just can't do that. So we have to get away from the crisis, from just trying to deal with crisis all the time. So to be able to plan and implement strategically, and that certainly can be done. You see, the government will say you have, we're investing this and we're investing that, but often the money isn't getting to where it needs to get to. And the waiting lists are too long. So if you're in crisis today, rightly as you say, you can't and you can't access services, then that is an extremely, extremely difficult situation. Because again, if you broke your leg, as difficult as the health services are, somebody would come and fix it.
You will be treated.
But if it's something, if you're in a dark place in your mind and you're really struggling, then you need to have the same care and attention for that. But I think the most thing as well is for people to believe that the system can be different, because it can be different, and it's different in many other countries as well. And you need age-appropriate supports as well.
It's a significant challenge when you see somebody in services up to the age of 18, and then the transfer of that service, then there seems to be holes certainly there too. Yeah. And you talked about equality.
Yeah.
I would argue that, though, that, as we said, fundamentally on paper the services are there, but again, in my opinion, mental health services depend on your financial abilities, and that is, for me, it's horrific.
Yes.
I find that, despairing to think about that. Essentially, if you can pay it privately, you can get help tomorrow. If you can't and you're not in that situation, unless you're fortunate enough to come into services like Mayo Mental Health Association, like Mindspace, like Jigsaw, again, charity-based organisations, then yes, you might get help, but otherwise you're out on your own and the help simply isn't there.
That is the great inequality, is that if you have money, you can get it. If you don't have money, it is way, way more difficult for you to get it, and that system has to change. And I suppose that is the one thing that we're about as a party, that it's not based on ability to pay. Your access to services should never be based on ability to pay. And that is whether you are in college, whether you're doing an apprenticeship, or whether you're out of college and the other side of it. I know in the third level institutions as well. I know even in Trinity this year, the emergency appointments, last year you got 6. In this year you get 3.
Okay.
So we're going in the wrong direction
in
regard to it. And yet we'll be told there's millions and billions. But you see, if you're sitting there and you're in difficulty, there's no point in a big chart being up on the wall saying there's $1 million for this and there's $1 million for that and whatever. It's down to whether you can access the service or not. And young people and people need to be centre of that, and really they're not centre of it at the moment. And there's a whole kind of industry built up around it. That shouldn't be. So it's about it being targeted, but it's about evaluating the money that's spent as well.
And there's no point having the money. As you said, we could turn around and say, for those listening actually, we are the richest country in Europe.
Yeah.
Is that any good to the rates of suicide? No. Is that helping anybody in the mental health sector that's struggling?
Yes.
No. Why are we the richest country in Europe, yet we still have such burdens?
Yeah, we were a surplus of 24
It's hard to explain.
billion. And I'll tell you why. You see, you have to look at the causes as well. So you look at the causes as we are now. The cost of living is really, like, the financial pressures is really impacting on people as well, and on young people, because you see the family under pressure. So if the family is under pressure in terms of housing, or in terms of access to health, or many of the other challenges that are there, then that's obviously impacting people. People trying to study and trying to work at the same time. No student accommodation, living in unsuitable accommodation, maybe having to travel long distances, maybe trying to get an apprenticeship when you're one end of the country and being sent to the other end of the country. So many of the causes can be fixed outside of mental health as well. The societal problems can be fixed in order to be able to reduce the pressure that's on people. They don't need to be there. So we don't need to be in a housing emergency as we are at the moment.
And that's the question I think people have to ask, because I don't know. I want to know, why is the cost of living so high? Why is it so hard to sustain a household and to buy your own household? So my example, me and my partner, 3 kids in our house, we both have full-time jobs, we managed to sustain the house, but just about. So how does one do that in a single parent household? How does one do that when they're full-time caring for their child with additional needs? Somebody going through a mental health crisis, bereavement, all of those things. I think people, we're just about floating.
Yeah.
I feel like we're keeping our head above the water, but just about.
Yeah.
There's nobody thriving in the most well-off country in Europe. How is nobody thriving?
Yeah.
All of us in the middle seem to be just about sustaining, and it feels like if one thing went wrong, if something happened to one of the persons in the house, or any crisis hit your door, I think you drowned at that stage. I think you'd struggle to maintain the rent on your home or whatever. The cost of living is that high that I really think it's putting so much pressure on people. And look at your 18 to 24-year-olds. Where are they?
Yeah.
They're in Australia.
Yeah.
They're not here.
Yeah.
They're gone. Some people have tickets booked before they finish their leaving cert. That's a problem.
It is a problem for society, and it is a problem for people and young people who can't take it. See, one time, when I left to go, because I had to immigrate, just thinking the other day we were discussing immigration, and I was discussing it on a Zoom meeting last night actually with a lot of our diaspora, because I think they need to be involved in the decision making in the country as well. But my grandparents left, my parents left, I left, and now my son has left. And it can be for different reasons. I left because there was no hope in hell of me getting a job in my own country. But others are leaving now because young people want to live independently. They don't want to be living with their parents. And if they want to live independently, they're being forced to immigrate.
Absolutely.
That is not right. And we have normalised that situation. We've almost presented it as a solution that you immigrate. That should not be the case. That is the reality, but it shouldn't be normalised in that sense. So we want to create an island that people can come back to, where they can have a home of their own, where they can, and it's key to what you're saying, where people can live. We all only have one life, but where people can live a quality of life, not just exist. I don't know how old your children are. How old are your
11, 6, 2.
Are they?
Yes, it's all go.
Well, congratulations. But you see, in childcare and the cost of childcare.
I know all about it.
And that's why we have said €10 per day per child. That is the system we want to have here. We need absolute investment into childcare to allow people then, if people want to go out to work, or let's face it, in most houses,
most people want to work.
People want to work, and people have to work. But you can't, if your childcare is just so expensive that you can't exist. So we want to have a childcare system, and it can be done. We want to have a childcare system that's like on a national school basis, because you have to look at either end, and you look at childcare as being early years education as well, and then you look at the third level education. So you look at early years, and you make that a system that can be accessible for everybody, and also taking childminders into account as well, and how people choose to have their children minded. And then on the other end, for third level, like, people are crucified with fees and with accommodation.
It's extortionate.
In particular.
It's absolutely insane. Yeah.
It is. And there's a fix for that. Well, our policy is to abolish student fees. That has been for a long time. Others have promised it, but third level education.
Scottish model.
Yeah, but third level education now is the same as secondary education used to be, in terms of access to employment and all of that. But also, for us living in rural Ireland, accommodation is integral to your education as well. So that's why in the alternative budget we showed how we put in 100 million into student accommodation, and then that accommodation that would be built with the universities would be conditional on having it affordable for people as well. And again, that can be done. See, we sometimes are led to believe that it couldn't possibly be done. But we look at other countries and other models, particularly in the Nordic countries.
We do that with youth services too. Like Planet Youth would have been built out of that. We're looking. You have to look further afield where people have made significant strides forward and pull from their policies. Of course you do, especially when your countries are relatively similar in size and in systems. But I suppose, just to move on from that, what we hear, especially around election, is a lot of we will, and then I suppose the argument again is back to implementation. I can come up with a lot of fantastic ideas here and run, but will I implement them? Will I have the capacity to do it? So you guys have been sitting as opposition for the last number of years, and I would argue it is kind of a little bit easy to sit there and poke and prod when you don't have to, I suppose, apply after the fact. You don't have to bring the solution to the table. But if things go your way on the 29th, and you end up in power one way or another, with whatever system it takes to do that, what would be the first steps forward for Sinn Féin? What do you think would change significantly from all of the issues we have? Housing obviously being top priority number one, really. What would we see shift as the Irish people?
So we understand that under a Sinn Féin government, people would expect something fundamentally different. They
Absolutely.
would expect it to feel different, they would expect it to feel different in their own lives and in their families' lives and all that. So we're acutely aware of that. But we were talking about mental health services, so part of our plan under Prescription for Change and delivery of health services would be an investment in mental health of €250 million. I think that would make a significant difference, but also in terms of accountability in the system along the way, in the measuring of outcomes. So it's not just investing money in, it's what outcomes do we get for that. I'm fed up with pilot projects as well. I think we have enough projects to be able to, if we resource them properly and have proper accountability within the system, then we can really make things work from there. In relation to housing, obviously we have a very comprehensive housing plan as well. Owen O'Brien is our housing spokesperson, and we would ramp up the building of social and affordable housing. Now we have our affordable housing model, which would be to enable people. We obviously absolutely believe in people's right to have a home. That's not right to have a free home, but it's right to have a home that they can afford. So whether that's to rent or to buy. In our affordable housing model, we would provide the land, the state would provide the land, and that land would be serviced. That would bring down the price of housing. Housing has increased way too much beyond the reach of people. If we're talking about affordable housing,
absolutely.
For €500,000,
it's bananas. Even around here, it's gone insane. And then obviously bulked up then by the pie rights issue locally anyway.
Yes.
That like so much building and construction is going on. The expense is that the pricing of houses even here in the West is
crazy.
It's crazy.
Right here, we're sitting here now. There's people living in their cars in Ballina. That is just so wrong. There's other people who are frightened that their tenancy is going to come to an end, and other people living in overcrowded accommodation. And we're living in Mayo, that we have like the county of Michael Davitt. So every single day of the week you have different cases presented, and each of those cases is really, really hard. And people, I suppose, have the decision of whether we want to change that in terms of that. See, what happened was the government stopped building houses. So they contracted out in terms of the housing assistance payment and the Ross payment. So they abdicated responsibility for house building.
All to the private sector.
All to the private sector. And this has happened in health, it's happened in housing, it's happened in so many other things, in that it's just contracted out. So you get smaller and smaller government all of the time.
Yeah.
And the first job of any government is to protect its citizens. Well, we have 14,500 people homeless. Government are refusing to produce the latest homeless figures. And 4,000 of them are children. What do you think happens to those children? What psychological damage is being done to children and to young people who don't have a permanent home somewhere where they can really call home? We are, as well as destroying their individual lives and families' lives, we are building up huge pressures for society, where we're building a society like this. And as you said, we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We have to have change. So back to your original question as to why we need change, I think all of those things speak to that. It is important and I would just be asking people to just take a chance for change in this election. Use the power that you have, and whoever you decide to vote for, use the power that you have. And it's not about tweaking things or I'll feel a bit better if I vote for an independent, if I'm fed up with the government. The change that's needed across all of those areas that we've spoken about is so fundamental that we have to have a change of government.
I think there's a demand for change. I'm not sure what that change is, but I'm fairly sure that the general population of Ireland, the people I speak to anyway, people aren't happy, certainly. And like I said, I work in all community-based kind of areas. People aren't happy. Something does need to change, and what that is, I don't know. It kind of leads us on actually to an interesting point, and I think it's important. As I said, I think young people are kind of moving away from parties. I look at it as person before party now. That's certainly my policy, and I think a lot of people are quite like that. But Sinn Féin have certainly been tarred with the one brush. I'm not a history expert, and I wouldn't pretend to be one, but if we bring up the party name Sinn Féin, what gets attached to it immediately would be the IRA. And I think a lot of young people make that attachment without even knowing why or knowing the history. And as I said, I don't really know it myself. But you're given a chance now to explain, I suppose, why you're a member of Sinn Féin party and what does the Sinn Féin party stand for? What is it? What does it do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I suppose where we are now, we're 26 years after the Good Friday Agreement. I came back from London after the Good Friday Agreement, so I think we have a chance for, and that's why I got involved in Sinn Féin in the first place. When I came back from London, I looked around to where I was working for South West Mayo Development Company.
Were you politically activated before then?
I was always interested in current affairs, and I was always interested in our island, and it never made sense to me as a child and as a teenager growing up. It never made sense to me why part of our country would be divided and why another country would own part of our country. You know, even just looking at it geographically, like the island is too small. So I always wanted us to be in charge of our own affairs, and I always had a vision for what Ireland could look like and Ireland could be. So that stayed with me. But it didn't. I had no notion whatsoever of getting involved in politics. And indeed, at the time I did, when I ran in 2004, my two boys were under 3. So it didn't suit me at all. But there was things that I asked every woman in the place. I followed women around the supermarket to ask them what they run. And so it didn't suit me to do it. I bought a group of women when I was training women in community development, and I bought a group of women to Mayo County Council, and I looked inside and there was 31 seats and there was 3 women and 28 men. And I thought, I was coming from London, and I thought, this is a crazy situation, where are all the women? So that was part of why. And then we were after the Good Friday Agreement, and I thought, what is it that I can do for peace? And I found that Sinn Féin worked differently, and what I liked about Sinn Féin was, firstly, there was very intelligent people within Sinn Féin, but they were working in a way that was empowering rather than disempowering to communities. And I very much believe in that communities have their own solutions, that there's huge power within communities. And if you can empower rather than disempower communities, wonderful things that can happen. And it can happen in terms of the key issues in communities. That could be mental health, domestic violence, all of the other things that happen in any community. If you have a community response to those things, you can move mountains. So that's why I like the way that Sinn Féin worked. So it suited me better. It was more aligned to my way of thinking of empowering communities. I would say that was it, and that's how I've ended up here. So I think very much I'm in the right, I'm in the right party. I'm very privileged to work with some brilliant people, brilliant-minded people, north and south and internationally as well. Who I just think that things can be different, and I want to make a better life for people. Let's say I grew up in Ballycroy, a family of 9. I know what it's like to go through a lot of the challenges, and I want better for my boys. But I've always said as well, in terms of united, I want a united Ireland. I
think we might finish on that. Is the hot topic of the united Ireland. And I think, again, as I said, completely impartial. I want the same. I grew up in London. I grew up in London until I was 12, and then I moved over here. Both of my parents are Irish, and absolutely no issues in that sense. But to me, it fundamentally doesn't make sense either that Ireland should be Ireland.
Exactly, but so when we talk about all the things that are negative, I am so full of hope. I'm so full of hope for the future, and hope in what we can create here, what we can create on the island. I've always said United Ireland is no good to me if the boys in the Shankill Road don't have the same opportunities as my boys have here. We need equality of access to services that are needed for people to be able to live full lives, and I think we can do that on an all-island basis, like our health service on an all-island basis. We're doing wonderful work at the moment in terms of, we've done some, I'm on the Good Friday Agreement Committee in for economics and finance, but women in the Constitution. And I see a real opportunity for a new constitution to be built, but we have to have access, and we have to have the hard to reach voices front and centre of that. So what type of an All Ireland do carers want? Do people with disabilities want? Do young people who've gone through difficulties with mental health want? All of those people have a real richness in terms of what we can create. And I know we can create something that's fundamentally different than what we have now, where people are left behind. There should be nobody left behind in a republic, and certainly in my vision for a 32 county socialist republic, people aren't left behind, and people are rewarded, and people have equality of opportunity, and just we can create something really good for here and now, but that will serve us into the generations to come. So
lovely.
I'm full of hope.
Yeah, I think that's it's a positive point to finish on. I think we got a lot out of that. I certainly did. So I want to thank you for your time. Anyway, if there's any final message you want to get out there, by all means. I'm just grateful, as I said, to have your time, and very interested to hear where you're at, and even the bit of experience of what brought you here is quite very interesting.
Right. Well, thank you, Park, and thank you for giving me this time. And I guess the message I'd have for people is that message of hope, but to be involved and to realise that you have the power to change things. And collectively we have a huge power. It's just that we don't use it. I encourage people to get into politics as well, but to get involved in things. I got into politics by accident. I'm glad I did. It's been such a privilege for me to be involved in the political system, albeit I got into it by default, but God, collectively we can do an awful lot, and people just take the power on the 29th. Have your voice heard. Have your voice heard. But it's been a great privilege for me to represent people of Mayo, and I hope they'll give me a chance to continue on doing that.
Yeah, and I hope they do too. As I said, we have had a couple of dealings over the years, and I found you excellent. Yeah. So I wish you the best. I hope the 29th goes well for you personally, and let's see what it does for the country.
Thank you very much.
You're a star.
Thanks. Thank you.
Fair play.